I find myself in a rather complicated situation, one where my morals and feelings are at odds. Edward, my best student, has just declared his feelings for me, and I can't simply reject him because I feel the same way. But let's take it step by step. My name is Olivia, and I'm 35 years old. I've been a teacher at a prestigious university for a little over 3 years. Although I've always loved teaching, I never imagined that being an attentive and helpful educator would turn my life into chaos. It all began on the first day of classes for a new semester. I remember vividly how nervous I was at that moment, even though I had teaching experience. It was the first time I would be teaching a course in my passion, contemporary literature. Additionally, I knew from another teacher that this cohort had brilliant students, and I wanted to be up to the challenge. I entered the classroom with a smile, trying to hide my nerves. The students were seated at their desks, chatting, and didn't pay much attention to my arrival, all except him. He was a tall young man with dark hair and intense eyes that seemed to observe me with a mix of curiosity and satisfaction. At first, I didn't give it much thought. After all, it was normal for them to stare at me too much since I was the youngest teacher on the faculty. However, when I saw him smile, I knew there would be trouble. "Are you seriously the teacher?" he asked in front of the entire class as I finished my introduction. I nodded, giving him a friendly smile. He wasn't the first person to ask me that question, but I could tell from his tone that he genuinely wondered about my age. "What age did you graduate?" he asked. "At 20, I replied. The room filled with gasps, murmurs, and whispers while another satisfied smile appeared on his lips. "Then you must be amazing," he said, and I could only nod, even as my heart skipped a beat in my chest. I can't lie. Over the following weeks, Edward began to occupy more space in my thoughts, especially because of those words he had said in the first class. But it wasn't just that. He was an outstanding student, intelligent, and very attentive, making the class enjoyable. His comments in class were always insightful and accurate, and his written assignments showed a maturity and sensitivity rarely seen in people his age. This undoubtedly caught my attention and made me feel more interested in him. That could have been the end of it, him being my favorite student and me being the teacher who made his time at the university enjoyable. But life had something more in store for me with him. Something I certainly didn't expect but had already sensed from the first moment we saw each other. At first, I tried to ignore the fact that I felt different about him. I'm a professional, and I know that any type of relationship with a student is not only unethical but also dangerous. But the more I tried to convince myself that any feelings would be inappropriate and unfounded, the harder it became to keep Edward out of my mind. Things got more complicated when I started noticing small details, like how he always sat in the front row and brought me gifts to class, or how he always found a way to stay after class to help me with anything I needed. This made me think about him all night, even though it seemed illogical that a 23-year-old guy would make me sigh like that. But it happened, due to his ambiguous behaviors. Eventually, the moment would come when I realized I had reasons to feel something for him. It was one afternoon while I was reviewing assignments in my office. Up to that point, everything had been quiet until I heard a soft knock at the door. "Come in," I said without looking up from the papers. The door opened, and I finally looked up to find Edward standing there with that same calm expression and those eyes that seemed to read me like any of the works we saw in class. "Sorry to interrupt, teacher. Do you have a moment?" His voice was soft, almost a murmur, so I decided to give him my best smile to let him know he was welcome. "Of course, Edward. How can I help you?" I asked. "I wanted to talk about the essay I submitted last week," he said as he approached my desk. "I'm not very sure about some parts, and I'd like to hear your opinion." I invited him to sit down, and we began to review his essay. As we talked, I realized my heart was beating faster than usual. And no matter how hard I tried to focus on the text, it was difficult when he was so close, observing me with those eyes that even invaded my dreams. "Your essay is excellent, as always, Edward," I finally said, trying to maintain my composure. "But I think you could delve a little deeper into the symbolism of the work. Maybe you could explore how the author uses elements of nature to reflect the emotional states of the characters." After a few seconds in which his eyes scrutinized the text, he looked up to show approval of my comments. "I will, teacher. Thank you for the suggestion," he replied with a smile. That's when I realized the proximity of our bodies. I had unconsciously moved closer to him without noticing that it wasn't appropriate how we were talking. I stepped back immediately, but the damage was done, as in Edward's eyes shone the recognition. He had noticed my mistake, but contrary to all expectations, or perhaps confirming my intuition, he had liked it. After that, Edward began to visit me in my office more frequently. Sometimes it was to discuss literature, other times, it was simply to chat about university matters. The truth is that he was a very persistent young man, as he always found an excuse to spend time with me. And although I tried to keep the conversations strictly academic, there were moments when the tone changed and became more personal and intimate. One afternoon, while we were talking about our favorite authors, Edward surprised me with a question I didn't see coming. "Teacher, do you think it's possible to fall in love with someone who isn't appropriate for you?" I fell silent for a moment, trying to process the question. Not only because I knew that with this, I was treading on dangerous ground, but also because it reminded me of the two of us. I wanted to know if he was referring precisely to that or if I was misreading the signals. "What do you mean by not appropriate?" I asked, trying to sound casual, even though I was dying to know everything. "Well, I mean someone with whom you know you shouldn't be, but you can't help feeling something for that person," he said, his eyes fixed on me. I felt like my soul wanted to leave my body. I didn't know if he was hinting at something about us, if he felt the same way, but for a moment, I allowed myself to dream, and that's what I was doing. "I think we've all felt something like that at some point in our lives, Edward," I replied after thinking about it for several seconds. Then I let out a stifled sigh, trying to release some of the tension, even though he might not understand me. "But sometimes what's right and what we want aren't the same thing," I added. He nodded but said nothing more. However, I noticed that he was tense from how he clenched his jaw, which caught my attention. Without a doubt, those words had an effect on Edward's subconscious, but I still didn't know if it was all about me. The following weeks were chaotic for me. I tried to keep my distance, to be professional, while in my mind, the debate was more latent than ever. The truth is that the idea that Edward might like another girl who seemed inappropriate to him hurt me, but it also didn't seem right that he might be referring to me. That's why every time Edward looked at me in class or continued to have the same attentions as before, I felt all my self-control waver. I wanted to get all the information possible about what was going through his head to know if it was me he was in love with, even though I didn't plan to have anything with him. I felt that knowing it would give some comfort to my heart. The truth is that as the end of the semester approached, I felt the hope of knowing who he was referring to dying more and more, until the last day of classes arrived, and he gave me a surprise that put me between a rock and a hard place. For that day, I had prepared a small farewell for my students to thank them for their effort and dedication during the semester. Most of them were happy and excited about the upcoming vacations or about securing an internship and starting to gain professional experience as soon as possible. In contrast, Edward was quieter than usual. I worried immediately, as he had never shown such an attitude during the semester, and I was intrigued to know the reason, if it was within my possibilities to help him. However, with all the attention on me, I didn't have the opportunity to approach him. When the class ended and the students began to leave, Edward remained in his place. I thought that would be the ideal moment to approach him and ask what was wrong. But he hurried and stood in front of me. "Teacher, can we talk?" he asked in a serious tone. "Of course, Edward. Tell me," I said in a calm voice to make him feel at ease. I saw how he took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for what he was about to say. After a few seconds, he looked at me with the same intensity he usually did and said words that, to this day, I have not forgotten. "I know this isn't appropriate, and I know I should probably keep it to myself, but I can't go on like this," he said, pausing for a moment. I could see in his eyes how he hesitated before confessing what he wanted to tell me, the words that would change everything between us. "I like you, teacher. I have for months. I can't stop thinking about you, and every time I'm with you, I feel like I finally understand what love is." Saying that I was left speechless is an understatement. I had considered the possibility that something like this might happen, but one thing is to imagine it, and another is to hear it from his own lips as he had said it. I didn't know what was worse, but knowing that I was facing the scenario that would cause the most inconveniences made me feel out of place. I didn't know what to do. "Edward, this is..." I tried to find the right words, but none seemed correct. "I know it's complicated. I don't expect you to answer now. I just wanted to be honest with you. I'll give you a week to think about it. If you decide you don't feel the same way, I'll accept it, and we'll never talk about it again. But if you feel even a little of what I feel for you, then I'll be here waiting," he said. After saying that, he turned around and left the classroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a million emotions coursing through my body. Now, here I am, a week later, not knowing what to do. During these days, I haven't been able to concentrate on anything but Edward and what he told me, how I feel when I'm with him, and what it would mean for both of us if I decide to reciprocate his feelings. In theory, I have stopped being his teacher, but I work at the same institution where he studies. We are both adults, of course, but society is still not ready to accept a love that was born in a classroom, especially since I know beforehand that the institution where I work is very conservative and that it is more than likely that I could lose my job, and his academic career could be affected. Additionally, I don't know if he feels the same way I do, or rather, if his feelings are as strong as mine. It's clear that many years and a generational difference separate us and that we are in different stages, so I also don't know if it's a good idea to risk everything for something that might not be as serious. But at the same time, I think it's not fair to lose the opportunity to be with someone for whom I feel something special, and if we are depriving ourselves of something that could be wonderful, and if we can never be together. That's why I need your help. I don't know what to do, as I said at the beginning. I am divided between what is correct, what morality tells me, and what my heart dictates. Edward gave me a week, and that week ends tomorrow. Should I follow my heart and risk everything for him, or should I be sensible and put an end to this before